Hey, Paul.
Hey Fab,
How are you?
good. You? Happy New Year. It's our
Good.
first session after the New Year.
That's true. It is. It
Yeah.
is.
I'll be confusing
Um,
for viewers because they might not be sent out that way, right?
I might just be posting it in February. So who knows? But
Okay.
um, yeah. So actually, this is going to be an interesting show for me because the operationalization of it is a bit more difficult. So that's always an interesting challenge for me. We're going to talk about the role of emotion in sales, which is often forgotten. For somebody who's been reading a lot of books on sales, listening to a lot of trainings, reading a lot of blog posts, and all that stuff. Emotion is rarely covered. If anything, it'll be covered in terms of like a rep, like stand up, make sure you're confident, blah blah blah. But that's about it, right? Like you're the only one. I never, as you were talking, we were preparing the show offline. It reminded me of one of the old first. I don't know if it was the first, but one of the early episodes that we did, and we were talking about, I believe, is the conversation started like the opener when you're doing a cold call, and
Yeah.
you were telling me like you need to elicit an emotion into
Yeah.
that, and that was the first time I really heard about using sounds like like devious, but using emotions in your sales process, because it's true. At the end of the day, people buy with emotion, right? Like you'll justify, especially in B2B, with all the ROI and the mathematics of it and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, they'll buy on emotion.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, and what spawned this idea for me to suggest the subject is that I was reading a scientific paper, a pretty heavy duty paper, because someone said to me, "Well, what's the role of emotions in sales?" So I literally I researched it, and I found this great paper that had these psychologists or psychiatrists. I'm not sure what they are, clinical psychologists, I guess, but PhDs, and they'd done an
Mm-hmm.
analysis on people who'd had damage done to their prefrontal cortex, which rendered them incapable of feeling, of feeling emotions, and because they also realized that they couldn't feel emotion. So they didn't feel happy, they didn't feel sad, but then they also were paralyzed when it came to decision making. And the
Okay.
paralysis of decision making was apparently in some of these patients complete. Like, do you want to eat bacon and eggs for breakfast or cereal? I don't know. And apparently the rest of their cognitive abilities were all there. Some of them were these really weird accidents. One guy had a rod go through his head, and so all of the cognitive capabilities were there. Like they could have a conversation with you, they could talk about a lot of different things, but the, their capacity to make decisions was gone. So when we say, and you just said it before, when you're making a big B2B decision, you think it's all rational and there's no emotion, but the actual decision just to go forward is based on emotion. Yes, you might be looking at all the rational things, but you have to sort of put that all into a funnel, and the final go is based on an emotion. So
Mm-hmm.
that study made me think, hey, hold on a second. We're all humans. We all go through this. But most humans or individuals like you and I, we think of buying a car or buying glasses or I don't know, buying a phone. And we know that's emotional. We know, yes, there's some rationale. I need a phone, but you want that black phone and you want the iPhone with the five cameras on it and all these doodads. You know that's emotional because you're saying, I don't really need this. But so in the B2C world, we're quite aware of the irrationality of purchasing. But often in the B2B world, well, if you're buying a SaaS or installing a CRM like HubSpot or Salesforce, I know I made the hair go up on your back there.
You triggered some emotion right there for sure, Paul.
It's not good emotion though. So when you're making those decisions, most people will think that it's only rational. And of course, there's a lot of rationality that goes in there, but still, that final decision to go is an emotion. And one thing,
Mhm.
so I have a question for you now, because I know you've been reading about it, and you were saying that you had read up on some of your own research, that the emotions during the buying cycle, let's talk about a typically longer buying cycle, will change quite a bit from the beginning to the end. So tell me a bit more about that, because when we were talking offline, I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, but before we jump into that,
Okay.
I just want to take a step back maybe, and so we kind of you set the table for emotions, or we set the table for emotions in sales. But as a sales leader, obviously you're managing a sales team, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And what are you hoping your salespeople to do? And I wanted to cover this thing about the switching of emotion within this topic,
Okay.
but why don't you kick it off? Like what as a sales leader, what are you hoping your salespeople do as it relates to emotions?
Thanks for reining me in, Bab. That's good. Or else I was going on a tangent. Okay, so it's very important as a sales leader. What you really want to do with salespeople, and we'll talk
Yeah.
sales, but really, I'm saying sales leader, but this is in any communication. What it is
Yeah.
you want to make sure that your salespeople are very cognizant or aware of the emotion or the emotions that the people are dealing with are feeling. So, and how do you do
Mm.
that? Well, it's hard to say, hey, what emotion are you feeling? Because some emotions are quite, if they're full out angry, you'll be able to tell. Or if they're full out bored, sorry,
Mhm.
I apologize about that. If they're full out bored, you'll to tell as well, right? So, what it is that you want to do as a human being is you want to make sure, as a selling human being, is you want to make sure of sort of three things. And the way you'll judge the emotions, it's physical, right? So there's body language, right? And that includes eye contact, that includes presence, that includes everything that's happening with the body. And we also want to consider the language. What I mean by language is the tone of the voice, the way they're speaking to you, and are they paying attention? Are they deep in reception of their, are they on their phone declining messages while they're doing various things? Are they really paying attention? So then they're maybe bored and not interested. Or do you see in the facial expression some kind of, and all of these things are natural. These things are things that we're programmed as human beings, as animals, really. These are things that have been with us for millions of years. An example that I give people is, do you have a dog? Have you ever had a dog?
No.
Okay, so if you had a dog, okay, you'll
Yeah.
know that your dog will read your face emotions, and sometimes you're like, how the hell does my dog know? Because they don't hear the words you're saying so much. They might know 200 or whatever. If you have a really smart dog, they can know up to 200 words, but what they're reading is your facial expression and your body language. Well, human beings do the same thing, but we do it instinctively. So as a
Mhm.
salesperson, just tune into that instinctive stuff and say, okay, where's my buyer right now? Is he paying attention to me, or is he bored like Fab is right now because I'm talking too long? Um, so, so essentially, what it is you got to make sure that you're aware of that in that conversation. And the best way to practice that, honestly, Fab, is by doing role plays. And at first, having your role to be a little bit outrageous, so that you make people aware of what's going on. So, as a sales
Right.
leader, as a manager of people, that's what you do. Now, you should be doing this when you're talking to anyone. Now, the mistake that a lot of salespeople do, and a lot of sales leaders see this in their salespeople, is that they're so excited about a product or about an opportunity that they have their blinders on and they're just going. They're talking
Right.
like crazy. They're not paying attention. They're not tuning in. So, and that's where you might elicit a negative emotion in your potential buyer, because they're saying, "Well, this guy just wants to sell me something, and he's not really
Yeah.
in tune with what's important to me."
Right.
So, there. Sorry, long answer.
No, but that makes a lot of sense. And I wasn't bored. I was actually a lot of things that you made me realize as you were talking, and I maybe really I realized that I lied a bit at the beginning of the show when I said we don't really talk about emotions in training. I think we actually talk a lot about emotions. We just don't use the word emotions. But when we talk
Okay.
about identifying like the value of what you're selling? Are there critical events? Like what happens if we don't implement the CRM by this stage? Like you're all trying to go get an emotion in there. And
Mhm.
and what you were alluding to in terms of the book that I've been reading, it's called The Jolt Effect, is that actually emotions change a lot between the beginning of the sales process
Yeah.
and the end of the sales process, right? So and the big problem with sales training is that we don't cover that. We cover a lot of the emotions at the beginning of the sales process, like listening to fear, what happens if this doesn't happen, like what's the impact on your business, right? You're all trying to get that prospect to be like, holy moly, I didn't realize that my crappy CRM was costing me $3 million a year. I need to switch it, right? Like I need to do something better. I need to do something different. But what these researchers have discovered is that at the end of the sales process, and especially when you start getting into, obviously objections happen
Yep.
throughout the sales process, but objections tend to happen a lot at the beginning and a lot at the end, is the playbook that we deploy for sales is to remind them of the pain, right? Like, well, remember your shitty CRM is costing you $3 million a year, but
Or the
the prospects
excitement too. It could be the excitement
yeah,
of saying, hey, when I was talking at the beginning, there's excitement on saving 20 or 30% on
yeah,
your CRM. Now they're fearful at the end because they're having, right. So it could be the excitement.
exactly.
It doesn't have to be negative. Yeah.
Exactly, and there's a shift, right? And it's the shift that we've all know, right? Because as a consumer, as a B2C buyer, you've felt it depending on what you've been buying, is that buyer's remorse. And as they get close to the end of the sales process, and they know they're going to have to make a decision, is that there's this fear that starts building in. And the more you harp on that initial
Excitement
emotion
or
of like
yeah.
excitement or fear or whatever, the more you're actually accentuating the fear of making a decision, right? Because at that point, they need to be reassured, right? They need to be coddled, they need to be reminded that this is the right choice. Because a B2B buyer, you're right, emotions plays a lot, but they're not spending their own money, right? And at the end of the day, if they're the ones making the decision, if their ass is on the line, right? Like if they buy Salesforce and it's the wrong decision, like, and the company has spent like hundreds of thousands of dollars deploying it, who
Sorry,
whose
Pat.
ass is on the line, right?
That's too
It's
much of
Paul.
an
Paul,
easy
you're the one.
point.
Paul, you're the one
I
who
love
made the
it though. I
decision,
love it.
right?
Yeah.
But that plays with the
Yeah.
buyer's decision, right? Because
Yeah.
while they know that their current system isn't set up properly, and they believe along the way that a certain CRM was the right decision, when it comes down to like, I need to put pen on paper
Yeah.
here, and if this explodes, like, it's my name, like accounting is going to go back, and like my boss is going to go back, and who signed off on this?
Yeah.
It was Fab, it was Paul. And so as a rep, you need to be aware of that switch of emotions, right? Of that
Yeah.
switch of from being excited or fear that the business isn't going well, or excited that they will be doing something new, to the fear of doing something wrong, right? And
Yeah.
that's and how you deal with that is completely different.
And so can I just, I'd like to put that, I love an, you know me. I want to put that emotional shift in an analogy. So
Yeah,
it's sort of like your friend says, "Hey, let's skydiving this summer," and you're like, "Oh wow,
right.
sounds great," and you're all excited about it, right? Because we're going skydiving this summer. This is going to be fun, and then you're thinking about it, and you're going, you're still on the positive high, right? And then this summer happens, June 15th, and he picks up the house, and you're like, "I don't want to go skydiving anymore." You're afraid because you think of all the bad things that can happen, and it's exactly
Yeah,
to me that's a great analogy for that sales process. So here you are, a B2B buyer, like, oh wow, it'll do all these great things. Put HubSpot in there. It's going to do all these great things, and then you're like, oh my god, but I'm going to be spending, for my 20 reps, x thousands of dollars a month, and then you're only looking at the negative. So that's a very good point to be aware of that emotional shift, right?
yeah,
And it might not be obvious because you're not sitting necessarily in front of your buyer at this point. Like it might be through an email
yeah.
or just being ghosted because they want to delay the decision. And so that's interesting. And I'm happy you brought that up because you also have to be able to keep to what the emotions of the individual is feeling to make sure
At that
you're
moment,
doing the right thing. So
yeah.
so
And
but to
so
me, oh, go ahead.
yeah, I mean, unless you wanted to continue on that, but to me, I'm like, so we know what kind of as a salesperson, what we're hoping to achieve, a sales leader should be hoping to achieve, right? That the salesperson, if I just recapitulate, uh, um, recap, sorry, is, we want them to be aware of emotions. We want them to be aware that emotions change throughout the sales process. We want them to be aware of, like, listen for those trigger words, those body language, right? If somebody's like half looking in the camera or twiddling on their phone, answering emails, or being distracted, like there's an emotion there, like they're bored or they're feeling overwhelmed. Like, it might not always be easy to identify the exact emotion that they're feeling in that moment, but being aware that emotions are present and shift throughout the sales process, especially if you have a long sales process, right? Especially if it involves a massive investment for the company, because we talked about emotion, right? The ROI might make sense. Like, yeah, I'm spending $1.5 million on this new ERP and all the services that go with it, and that's supposed to save me $20 million at the end of the year. But it's still a $1.5 million investment, and that's a big number, and it's not my money, and it's my ass on the line if it screws up, and it's my thing. And I don't know if I have full trust in this agency to deploy it properly. Last time we worked with an agency, it screwed up, blah 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 blah. And you have to be aware that that's a
Yeah.
possibility. And going back to
If
the purpose even of the show is asking the right questions, right? Is not
yeah,
assuming stuff, is diving deeper and asking questions and understanding the reality, beyond today,
well,
beyond what's in your
I,
playbook or
I
whatever.
love I love the fact you say that about asking the right questions, because when the rubber hits the road, I love that expression. I don't often get to use it, but the rubber hits the road when you get that first objection, right?
Yeah.
Because often you might think that you understand the emotions, you're not too sure, but get that first objection, now you're getting a roadblock and you need to figure it out. So what I want to bring up here is that we've been talking a lot about the buyer's emotion, but
Yeah.
the seller's emotion is also key. And where I see the most negative common emotions happening in salespeople, and salespeople should be aware of this, is that a lot of salespeople think that a sale is a straight line. I know there's Jordan Belfort's straight line selling, but what often happens is that you're selling, you're discovering, you're having the introduction, you're having the discovery, you're having a conversation with your buyer, and then all of a sudden, you're confirming, and then you're proposing, and then you're trying to close, right? And then you're getting an objection, and you get frustrated because you say, well, we've been all this, I told you told me how wonderful it was, and then you're feeling emotions, either sadness, usually it's anger, or frustration, and you just get into bully mode. You just want to push your thing through, rather than sitting down and taking the time and saying, okay, my client is unsure. His emotion right now is uncertainty. Let me discover. And then you got to go back into your questioning, right? You got to go back into discovering where the objection's from. So you got to take his uncertainty or her uncertainty in consideration, or their uncertainty into consideration, before you move any further. And that's an emotion you got to be aware of. So again, as you say, be aware of the emotions that you're trying to evoke, understand the shift that most likely happens, and ready, and don't be frustrated, and react properly with the proper questions in discovering what is truly halting. Because another thing that often, we've talked about this in objections, is we hide the emotion. We'll give a totally false, we'll give a totally false objection to someone we just want to get rid of, because they're in front of us and like, oh, sir, do you want to buy the guitar? Yeah, I'm going to think about it. I'm not sure about the color. But meanwhile, you're thinking, well, I don't have enough money in the bank to pay for it. So, I can't buy it. I made some quick calculations. But so you need to ask, as a seller, you need to ask the right questions to get there. I just wanted to add in that portion of understanding your own emotions and how you react to the reality of what's happening in the sales process.
That's true. And so if we switch, so we know what a sales leader should be hoping to expect from their salespeople, but what should a sales leader do, right? Like we talked about, the salespeople being aware of emotions, being aware of their own emotions or prospects' emotion, how emotions shift over time and switch and blah blah blah. But what should a sales leader do to ensure that happens?
So to ensure that the proper thing happens, right?
Yeah.
I think I've said this before, but I think so you're going to have some academia academic data. You might get them to read the book that you suggested. I might get them to read some scientific papers, but really to absorb it and to learn how to deal with it, the best thing to do is to role play it. And I think to role play it with extreme. So you as a sales leader act as the buyer who's going through those emotions to help your salespeople understand what's happening and to define those moments and to react properly. So I think if you
Mm.
do role plays, if you understand the process of it, the tactical process of it, or the what's actually happening, and then you practice it in reality, it'll help you absorb it, and so that it becomes part of your natural sales process and your methodology and your soft skills when you're dealing with your client. Does that answer your
Right.
question?
Yeah. And obviously it's a simple answer, right? Like I think the more complex part was understanding. We're hoping that the reps understand the emotion, but you're right. I think and it's maybe I'm being too fluffla. I don't know, but emotions is usually a touchy subject, right? Which is why I find in sales we used to try to hide it with this like what's the critical impact, what's the impact of this, and but basically you're trying to elicit an emotion. I think it's being open with your reps. Like you're trying to get an emotion. Like people buy with emotion. That's the reality of it. And I love what you're saying. I think the role play, you could train and coach and get them to read as many books as they want, but until they're practicing it right through a role play in the same way that an actor would practice the play that they're in, well, the role play is key. I think that's underutilized often, and definitely probably the best way to get your salespeople to understand that emotions are at play here.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting because I think as human beings, we are continuously in an emotional state. They might not be
Mm-hmm.
high emotions, but right now, you might just be comfortable. Well,
Yeah.
and then your comfort goes to excitement, or your comfort goes to fear, or your comfort goes to discomfort. If I say, hey, Fab, you got to get on stage and talk to 10,000 people in 5 minutes, and I just throw that at you, you might say, oh boy, now you're uncomfortable and you're going to fear mode. But we're always feeling an emotion. So to deny the fact that humans are in a continuous emotional state is to deny your understanding of what's actually going on.
Mm. Yeah. So how do we operationalize? Right? Like
How do we operate?
this is
How do
why
we
this is
operate?
an interesting topic for me. Yeah.
So how do we operationalize that? And that's interesting because I was thinking about that right from the start. I think it's having it in your playbook. So
Yeah.
when you in your sales process, we say all the way through, be aware of emotions, and then we say, what does that mean? And then you operationalize it with some written training,
Yeah.
some written background on it, and then you have some recorded role plays, and you stick it in your video playbook. And
Yeah.
I think just to plug HubSpot, I know that's very doable with the HubSpot platform. So
Yeah.
just have it in that you're reminded, to elicit a positive emotion, because you said it earlier. Is this an evil thing? You're trying to control emotions? No, I mean you want them to buy something, you want them to have a positive emotion, but you have to be able to understand when to do it and how to do it, and that's how you operationalize it by putting in your playbook at the different stages, or however
Yeah.
it fits in your sales process.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think playbooks is definitely key. And it's also, especially what we just talked about, how emotions shift throughout the process. Like, okay, well, now we're shifting into the buying, the decision making part of your sales process. So be aware that these and you could have like in your playbook, like warning, like this warning sign, right? Warning, like emotions at this point are going to change, right? And you need to shift from a positive or fear inducing to maybe more reassuring and whatnot, because they're emotion of the so you're definitely using your playbook and having it one for different parts of your sales process is key. I think another one that I just thought of is, and we've talked about multiple times, is your conversation intelligence, right? Listening into, we
Yeah.
talked about role plays, right, which is like the safety of your own home in a way, right? But listen to actual conversations, right? And uh, I can't help during this whole conversation that we've been having, I can't help but think about a real world example, which I don't know if I'm allowed to share, but I'll share it with scraped out details. You introduced me to somebody not long ago who was thinking of onboarding HubSpot and found out that they were speaking with another HubSpot partner at the same time, right? So it was me and another HubSpot partner, and they ended up going with the other partner, which I know very well, and they'll be happy with them, I'm sure. But thinking back on how that sales process went, there were a lot of warning signs that their emotions have shifted, right? They were talking a lot about certain elements that, without telling me directly, I don't think you can do this. And sometimes even framing it as a positive, right? Like, oh, well, you're one person, you mesh well with the team, blah, blah, blah. Really, what they were saying is like, maybe we need somebody to be a bit different from us to help us through this process, right? And
Yeah.
and so that's where, as a leader, listening into those conversations and saying like, hey, look, your not your rep, sorry, your prospect here keeps repeating that they need somebody located in the state of New York, right? They keep repeating that. Like, you need to start questioning that, right? Because this is a change of emotion that's happening, right? They're trying to, this is an objection. They're not telling you it's an objection, but they really want somebody in the city. Like, why? What's so important about this? Like, you need to start diffusing that, because this is an emotion. This is illustrating a switch of emotion.
Yeah. Absolutely, and that's actually a very good point, and you have to be aware of that. But what often happens as a salesperson, and your sales leader has to tune into this, is that the salesperson's so excited about the potential of this business that they'll ignore the bad signs.
Yeah.
It's sort of like, I always use dating as an example, and I just think it's funny, but it's also true. It's like you've got a crush on this girl when you're in grade 10, and you ask her out to a movie, and she says yes. And then the movie's coming, the night's coming along, and she's, oh, finally I can't go. I have to wash my hair. Your initial reaction, is, oh man, and you're all disappointed. But really, if you're a rational salesperson in that situation, so, well, why is she telling me she needs to wash her hair when she, is it because she doesn't like me? Is it because something happened? So, and you need to find that out, right? And if I'm putting this into a sales perspective, so it's very
right.
it's hard to do because our emotions get in the way, and
Yeah.
that's probably the bigger, if there's one thing, keep your emotions in check and try to understand your buyer's emotions.
Right. So I have a call coming up, so I think it's maybe a good place to start wrapping it up.
Okay.
I have some top takeaways from our conversation, but I wanted to
Yeah.
hear some of yours.
Well, okay. My top takeaway is, as a sales leader, make sure that you're training and practicing recognizing emotions, and make sure you're training and practicing recognizing your own emotions. And that would be the
Right.
two takeaways. And the things, how are the emotions detected at any level? It's body language, tone of voice, and the content. What's coming out of the mouth? The content of the actual conversation. In an email,
Right.
be very careful. It's really hard to judge. It's really hard to judge emotion when it's written down. So
Right.
that's
Yeah.
a whole other podcast. So those are my takeaways.
Yeah. So I think you're right. I think there's definitely teaching your reps to be aware of emotion, and helping them understand what emotions are and the roles of emotions, their emotions, their reps' emotion, their prospects' emotions, how the emotion shifts over time. On an operational side of things, I was like, make sure you're including emotions in your playbooks, and make sure you're including training and documentation and reminders on it, like in different playbooks at different stages of your sales process.
Yeah.
But also make sure that you're taking some time to listen into those conversations, either live or recorded, so that you can
Yeah.
help the rep, especially when you're dealing with a high level deal, right? This is a big deal for the company. Make sure you're listening to the conversations that have been recorded, so that you can identify emotions and switches in emotions, and potential objections and whatnot. So
Yeah.
that would be my takeaway, my add-on.
Awesome. Great
Cool.
takeaways.
Paul, this has been fun.
Yes. Thanks, Fab. It's also been fun. I've had very good emotions during this.
You triggered me with your Salesforce thing, but other than that, it was good.
Okay. All right.
All right. Take care, Paul.
Ciao. Bye, Fab.